When I inquired about my son's wedding date, my daughter-in-law smirked. "Oh, we tied the knot last night. It was for VIPs only." 3 days later, she called. "We're ready to move in. Did you send the keys to our 5M villa?" I answered calmly, "Oh, didn't I mention the condition?" You know, I never thought I'd be 71 years old, standing in my own kitchen, gripping the cold marble counter so hard my knuckles turned white, while my daughter-in-law, Monica, looked me dead in the eye and smirked. Her words weren't just a betrayal, they were a dagger twisting right into my gut. "Oh, we got married last night. It was for VIPs only." Can you imagine that? VIPs only, and his own mother wasn't one of them. For a second, I thought my ears were playing tricks. My hearing isn't what it used to be. But the way her lips curled, the glint in her eyes, she wanted me to hear every single syllable. My son, Ethan, stood right beside her, silent, shifting his weight like a guilty schoolboy. My hands started to tremble, not from old age, but from the sheer, burning shock of it all. VIPs only. And it just hit me, like a punch to the stomach. I had spent the last 3 years covering their rent, $1,800 a month, without fail. That's 36 checks, totaling $64,800. I'd even paid for Monica's lavender wedding dress, the one with all the sequins, $1,200 on my credit card from some fancy boutique he picked out. Groceries, small gifts, even Ethan's car repair when the engine died, it all added up. Nearly $77,500. And yet, for the most important day of his life, my son let me find out after the fact. Monica's eyes glittered with something colder than diamonds. "It was family only," she repeated, her tone dripping with satisfaction. The real family. I looked at Ethan, silently begging him, pleading for him to correct her, to say something, anything. But he just lowered his gaze to the floor, hands stuffed in his pockets. My heart cracked right there. In that moment, I realized what I had become to them all these years. Not a mother, not a human being with feelings, but a bottomless vending machine. Then, just 3 days later, the phone rang. It was Monica again, her voice sharp and casual, like she was ordering takeout. "We're ready to move in. Did you send the keys to the villa yet?" The villa? My villa? The home Harold and I built together on the Florida coast, worth $5 million, with wide glass doors that opened to the ocean breeze. That house wasn't just property, it was my sanctuary, my safe place after Harold passed. The garden where I planted roses. The dining room where I still set 2 plates. One had been empty for years. "Excuse me." I pressed the phone closer, utterly dumbfounded. "The keys," she repeated, impatient. "To the villa. Ethan and I are ready to move in. It's time you let us start our life there." For a long second, I couldn't breathe. The sheer nerve. The arrogance. They had excluded me from their wedding, humiliated me, and now they thought they could just take over the very roof above my head? My lips curled into a bitter smile. My voice, calm but steady, surprised even me. "Oh," I said softly, a dangerous quiet in my tone. "Didn't I mention the condition?" There was silence on the line. I could almost hear her stiffen. She hadn't expected resistance. For years, I had written checks, answered every call for money, nodded whenever Ethan begged, just this once, Mom. But this time was different. I hung up and sat at the dining table. I looked at the polished wood surface. Once a place for family meals, now littered with receipts, bills, and numbers. This table was no longer about love. It was a table of numbers, a battlefield where I could see exactly how much they had drained from me. $64,800 in rent. $7,200 in groceries. $3,500 in gifts. $2,000 in car repair. Totaling $77,500. A lifetime of sacrifice reduced to cold arithmetic. I whispered to the empty chair across from me, the one where Harold used to sit. I was nothing but a bottomless vending machine. But something inside me shifted. For the first time, I felt the machine breaking. I was tired. I was done. I had given enough, more than enough. And they had thrown me aside like yesterday's newspaper. I knew right then I wasn't going to hand over those keys. Not without them meeting my condition. And let me ask you right here, right now, What would you do if your own child and his wife cut you out of their wedding, then demanded the keys to your $5 million villa? Would you surrender out of love, or would you finally stand your ground? If you want to hear how I stood my ground, how I turned the tables after decades of being drained, dismissed, and finally decided enough. That night, I locked every door and double-checked the bolts on my villa. I walked through the halls, the memories of Harold brushing against me like ghostly whispers. I paused at the balcony, looking out at the ocean waves that glittered under the moonlight. I thought of Monica's smirk, Ethan's silence, and my own words, didn't I? Mention the condition. For the first time in years, I felt something that wasn't despair or exhaustion. I felt control. I felt fire. And I knew this was just the beginning. The very next morning, I sat at that same dining table with a yellow legal pad in front of me. For the first time in years, I wasn't writing another check. I was writing down every single dollar I had poured into Ethan's life since he left college. The numbers stared back at me like a cruel joke. 36 months of rent at $1,800 each came to $64,800. My hand shook as I wrote the figure, not because of arthritis, but because of the harsh truth it spelled out. Then I added $7,200 for groceries, bags of food I had delivered to their apartment so they wouldn't struggle. Another $3,500 for gifts, everything from flat-screen TVs to anniversary dinners I was never invited to. And $2,000 for Ethan's car repair when the transmission died. In total, it was $77,500. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the total like it was a gravestone. That number represented my love turned into debt. My motherhood measured in receipts. My heart ached, yes. But more than that, I felt anger rising from somewhere deep, a place I had buried for too long. Across the room, by the window, hung the lavender wedding dress I had bought for Monica. She'd left it here months ago after a fitting, too lazy to take it back. The sequins sparkled faintly in the morning light, mocking me. I had paid $1,200 for that dress, believing I was helping her step into a new chapter with dignity. Yet, she had walked into that chapter without me, declaring I was not family. On the floor beside the closet, a shoebox held a pair of silver heels I had bought for her too, still unworn, still in their tissue paper. I had pictured her walking down the aisle in them. Instead, I was the one left standing alone in my kitchen with nothing but numbers for company. I pressed my palm against my chest, whispering to myself, I was nothing but a bottomless vending machine. The phrase clung to me like a brand. I could almost hear Harold's voice, steady and calm, reminding me that love without respect is just charity. He had been gone for years, but his words still echoed in the walls of this villa. The bitterness tasted like metal in my mouth. All those years, I told myself it was temporary, that Ethan just needed time, a little push, some help to get on his feet. But he never stood up. He only leaned harder. And Monica, instead of lifting him, had sharpened his appetite. Then came the memory that sealed my decision. Just a week before their VIP wedding, Ethan had asked me if I would still give them the $5,000 I had promised for their big day. I had said yes, even though I suspected it would disappear into another credit card payment or a vacation I'd never be invited on. $5,000 on top of the $77,500 I had already given. That was supposed to be my wedding gift. Instead, they shut the door on me and handed the invitation to everyone else. The humiliation burned hotter than the betrayal. I wasn't just excluded, I was erased. And now they thought the keys to my $5 million villa were theirs for the taking. I stood up, pacing the dining room. My reflection in the glass cabinet looked older, yes, but also sharper. My jaw was tight. My eyes narrowed. For the first time in years, I saw not just a widow, not just a mother, but a woman who still had choices. I picked up the phone and dialed Ethan. He answered on the third ring. "Mom," he said, his voice cautious. "I want to be clear," I told him. "That villa is mine. It stays mine. If you and Monica think you'll move in without my permission, you're mistaken." There was a pause. Then his voice turned slick, practiced. "We just thought you'd want to help us, Mom. You always have. Isn't that what family does?" I closed my eyes. Family doesn't exclude their mother from a wedding and then demand the keys to her house. Silence, Then a sigh. You're making this harder than it has to be. Harder? I almost laughed. I've already made it easy for you, Ethan. $77,500 easy. The machine is broken now. I'm not paying anymore. He hung up. The click echoed in my ear long after the line went dead. I set the phone down and drew a thick line under the total on my legal pad. $77,500. That was the cost of my silence, my patience, my years of letting them take without question. No more. As I sat there, the villa seemed to hum around me. The ocean breeze slipped through the curtains, cool and steady. It felt like the house itself was agreeing with me, whispering that it was time to stand up, to draw the line. I looked again at the wedding dress, the silver shoes, the receipts scattered across the table. They were relics of a woman who believed that giving would buy her love. That woman was gone. I whispered to the empty room, if they want the keys, they'll have to meet my condition. And deep down, I knew what that condition would be. 3 days after that bitter phone call, I heard the sound of tires crunching on the gravel outside the villa. I looked through the blinds and saw Ethan's car pull up. Monica was in the passenger seat with sunglasses perched high on her nose, her lips already pursed in disapproval. They didn't knock. They strolled right up the walkway as if the house already belonged to them. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice flat. Ethan smiled weakly. "We thought we'd get a head start, Mom. You know, move some things." And Monica stepped past him, brushing against my shoulder as she crossed the threshold. She looked around the foyer, her gaze skating across the chandeliers, the polished marble, the family portraits on the wall. "Spacious," she murmured. "Perfect for entertaining." I clenched my fists. "This is my home." She turned, her smirk curling like smoke. "Not for long. Keys, please." The word keys rang in my ears. I felt Harold's absence beside me, the memory of his steady hand that used to comfort me. But I also felt his voice urging me not to cave. I straightened my spine. "Only VIPs get help," I said, my tone cutting. "Remember that?" Her smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before hardening again. Ethan stepped forward, his palms raised as if to calm me. "Mom, let's not do this." "Monica didn't mean it?" I snapped. "She meant every word. And now you both mean to walk into my villa like it's yours." "Not today." Monica folded her arms. "Ethan is your son. This house is his inheritance anyway. Why delay the inevitable?" "Inheritance comes after death," I replied coldly. "Last time I checked, I'm still alive." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Ethan's eyes darted between us, his jaw tight, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, maybe if you just let us settle in, things wouldn't be so tense." I laughed, bitter and sharp. "Settle in? After $77,500 I already gave you? After being cut from your family-only wedding? No. If you want to set foot in this villa, you'll do it under one condition." Monica tilted her head, curious but mocking. "And what condition is that?" I met her gaze. "You pay 6 months of your own rent up front, out of your own pockets, and you both sign a no-claim agreement stating you have no legal or financial rights to this property or any part of the Clark Living Trust. Do that, and only then will I hand over a key." The air in the room shifted. Monica's eyes flared, her face flushing with rage. Ethan's shoulders stiffened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "That's ridiculous," Monica snapped. "You can't put conditions on your own family." "I just did," I replied. Ethan's voice cracked. "Mom, why are you being so cruel?" "Cruel?" My laugh was hollow. "Cruel is cutting your mother out of your wedding and then demanding the keys to her $5 million villa as if she's already dead. Cruel is draining every cent she has and calling it family love." For the first time, Ethan looked ashamed. His lips pressed together, his gaze flicking away from mine. Monica, on the other hand, only doubled down. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "When you're old and alone, you'll wish you had been kinder." I stepped closer, my voice steady as stone. "I'd rather be alone than be used. Remember that." They stood frozen for a moment, the silence thick with everything unsaid. Then Monica turned sharply, her heels clicking against the floor as she marched toward the door. Ethan lingered a second longer, his eyes glassy, his lips parted as though he might apologize, but no words came. He followed her out. I watched from the window as they climbed into the car. Monica slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Ethan started the engine, his face pale, his hands gripping the wheel too tightly. They didn't look back as they drove off. I closed the door and leaned against it, my breath shaky but proud. For the first time in decades, I had not reached for my checkbook. I had not opened the door wide and let them walk all over me. I had drawn a line in the sand. I whispered into the empty hall, "The machine is broken." And yet, even as I savored that small victory, I felt a shadow creeping in. Monica wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. She would strike back, and I had to be ready when she did. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stood in the quiet villa, wondering what storm was about to come through my life. The next morning, I dressed in a navy cardigan and pressed slacks, the kind Harold always said made me look put together. I needed strength, and sometimes strength comes from the way you button your collar. I drove to the bank where I had been a customer for over 30 years. The air inside was cool, the scent of paper and polished wood lingering. I walked straight to the office of Mr. Lutz, the branch manager. He was in his 50s, tall, with a calm demeanor and eyes that carried both intelligence and kindness. He had known Harold and me when we first opened a joint account decades ago. "Vivian," he said warmly as I stepped in. "What brings you here today?" I sat down, smoothing the hem of my cardigan. "I need to make changes. Serious changes. I want to cancel every automatic transfer I've set up for my son Ethan and his wife." His brows lifted, but he didn't interrupt. He folded his hands on the desk and listened. "For 3 years, I've been paying their rent directly. I've covered groceries, emergencies, even luxuries. In total, it's been $77,500. And yesterday, they came into my home, acting like it already belonged to them. They demanded the keys to my villa as if I was just a placeholder waiting to die." His eyes darkened with concern. "Vivian, that sounds like elder financial abuse. You know I have to say it plainly." I swallowed hard, but I nodded. "I know. That's why I'm here. The machine is broken, Mr. Lutz. I'm not handing out another dollar." He leaned back, pressing his lips together. "I'll help you cut every automatic payment. But you should know, when children get used to this kind of support, they rarely let go quietly." I gave a bitter smile. "I don't expect quiet. I expect a fight, but I need to take the first step." Together, we reviewed the accounts. He showed me the records, 36 payments of $1,800 each. Pages of transactions highlighted in neat rows, all bleeding money into Ethan's life. My stomach twisted as I looked at the table of numbers. That table felt like another battlefield. With each signature I scrawled on the cancellation forms, I felt my spine straighten. By the time I signed the last one, my hand was shaking from both exhaustion and relief. Mr. Lutz looked at me with a respect I hadn't felt from my own son in years. "Vivian," he said softly, "this is the first time in all these years you've come here for yourself. Not for Ethan, not for Monica. Just you." Tears pricked my eyes. It feels like I'm finally awake. When I left the bank, the Florida sun was blazing, the air thick with salt from the nearby coast. For the first time in a long time, I inhaled deeply without the weight of guilt pressing on my chest. But that evening, just as I was setting a single plate at the dining table, headlights swept across my driveway. I froze. Then came the knock, loud, demanding. I opened the door to find Ethan standing with a man in a crisp suit. Monica lingered behind them, her arms crossed, her smile razor-sharp. "Mom," Ethan began, his tone falsely gentle. "This is Mr. Carroll. He's here to help straighten things out." Mr. Carroll extended a manicured hand. "Mrs. Clark, I represent your son and daughter-in-law. They've asked me to review some of your financial documents to ensure everything is in order. It's a simple matter. If you'll let us in, we can get started." The audacity nearly knocked the breath from me. Behind his polished tone, I could hear the threat. They were trying to corner me, to paint me as incapable of managing my own estate. I didn't take his hand. My documents are private. You have no right to them. He smiled, patronizing. Sometimes, Mrs. Clark, families don't understand when it's time to step aside. This villa, these accounts, they're complicated. We just want to protect you. My blood boiled. Protect me from what? From living in the house my husband and I built? From using my own money to buy my own groceries? No, thank you. Ethan's face tightened. Mom, don't make this harder than it needs to be. I stepped forward, my eyes locked on his. I already made it harder, Ethan. I went to the bank today. The money flow is over. The bottomless vending machine is shut down. For the first time, Ethan's mask cracked. His jaw clenched, his nostrils flared. Monica's eyes narrowed to slits, her fury barely contained. You'll regret this, she hissed. Maybe, I said. But I'd regret it more if I handed you my life on a silver platter. They stood there a moment longer, seething, before Mr. Carroll cleared his throat. We'll be in touch, Mrs. Clark. They turned and walked away, their silhouettes fading into the night. I closed the door, bolted it, and leaned my forehead against the wood. My heart raced, but my resolve burned brighter than ever. They had made their move, and I had made mine. The villa was quiet that night. Too quiet. I sat alone in the living room, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen the only sound keeping me company. My hands rested on my lap, the veins visible, the skin lined with years of sacrifice. For decades, I had convinced myself that being a good mother meant giving until there was nothing left. But now, for the first time, I was forced to ask, had I given Ethan too much? I closed my eyes and saw him as a boy again, standing in the backyard with a scraped knee. It hurts, Mama, he had cried, his little hands clutching at me. I had kissed the bruise, wiped away his tears, and promised him I would always be there. Somewhere along the way, that promise had twisted into something else. Always being there had become always paying. Every scraped knee turned into every unpaid bill. Every tear turned into another check. I walked to the hallway where family photos lined the wall. Ethan at 6, holding a fishing pole with Harold beaming beside him. Ethan at 16, grinning in his football uniform. Then Ethan at 21, graduating from college, the tassel on his cap swinging as he shook Harold's hand. That young man had so much promise. What happened? Was it me? Did I make it too easy for him to never stand on his own? The questions weighed heavy, pressing against my chest. I poured myself a glass of water and carried it to the dining table, now permanently covered in receipts and canceled transfers. This table used to hold laughter, Harold's jokes, Ethan's teenage complaints, and my Sunday pot roast. Now it was just numbers, a table of numbers. I traced a finger over the receipts, whispering to the empty air, this is what my love has become. The ache of loss throbbed inside me, not just for Harold, but for Ethan too. The boy I raised had been replaced by a man who saw me as nothing more than an ATM. And Monica, with her smirks and sharpened words, had only fueled the transformation. I needed air. I slipped on my cardigan and stepped outside. The night was warm, the Florida breeze carrying the scent of salt and jasmine from my garden. I walked slowly along the path Harold had once paved with his own hands, the stones uneven but sturdy. As I reached the gate, I paused and looked up at the stars. My voice trembled as I spoke to the night. Harold, I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm lost. They want to take everything we built. They want to call me useless, incompetent. I'm scared, but I'm angry too. Tears blurred my vision, but I wiped them away. I can't keep being the machine. I need to find another way. For me. The walk cleared my mind. By the time I returned inside, something inside me had hardened. I opened a door in the hallway and pulled out a set of new locks I had bought months ago but never installed. That night, with trembling but determined hands, I replaced every lock on every door. I called a security company and scheduled cameras to be installed by the end of the week. For years, I had left my doors wide open, both literally and figuratively, to Ethan and Monica. But no more. My home would be my sanctuary again, not their stepping stone. As I screwed the last lock into place, I whispered to myself, I may be 71, but I am not powerless. The next morning, The sun spilled across the living room, warm and golden. I brewed coffee and carried the mug to the balcony. The ocean stretched out before me, endless and free. For the first time in months, maybe years, I let myself imagine a life not chained to Ethan's demands. A life where my mornings belonged only to me. Still, a part of me ached. He was my son, and no matter what, a piece of me still longed for him to look at me with the love I once saw in those childhood eyes. But longing was not enough reason to keep bleeding myself dry. As I sipped my coffee, I whispered to Harold again, "They think I'm weak. They think they can scare me. But I'm stronger than they know." And in that moment, I felt it clearly. I was no longer just surviving their demands. I was preparing. The following week, I joined the garden club at the community center down the road. I hadn't gone in years, not since Harold passed, but something in me craved company beyond the four walls of the villa. I needed air, voices, and proof that my world was bigger than Ethan and Monica. The clubhouse smelled of fresh soil and coffee. Pots of camellias lined the windowsills, and women chatted softly as they arranged cuttings and swapped seeds. I stood hesitantly near the door, clutching my handbag. I almost turned back, afraid I would feel like an outsider. But then a woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp, kind eyes approached me. "You must be new," she said warmly. I smiled faintly. "Not new, just returning." Her hand was gentle when she extended it. "Eleanor Harris. I've lived in this neighborhood for 30 years. "Vivian Clark," I replied. "I live down by the coast." Recognition flickered in her eyes. "Oh, the villa with the rose garden. I've admired it for years." Harold was always out front trimming hedges. At his name, my throat tightened, but I nodded. Yes, he was proud of that garden. She tilted her head, studying me. "You seem like you're carrying something heavy." I almost laughed. "Carrying something heavy? Try carrying a son who drained $77,500 and still looks at you like you've done nothing." But instead of laughter, words spilled out. Maybe it was the safe tone of her voice, or maybe it was because I was tired of holding it all inside. "They shut me out," I confessed. "My son and his wife. They got married without telling me. Said it was family only, and now they want the keys to my villa." Eleanor's eyes sharpened, but not with judgment. Only understanding. She pulled out a chair and gestured for me to sit. "You're not alone. My daughter once tried the same thing. When I cut her off, she called me heartless. But 6 months later, she learned to stand on her own. It hurt, but it saved us both." Her words settled over me like sunlight. 6 months? I asked. She nodded. 6 months of saying no. 6 months of watching her stumble. But then she rose. If I had kept feeding her, she would never have found her legs. Tears pricked at my eyes. Ethan doesn't even see me as his mother anymore. Just a bank account. Eleanor reached across the table, her fingers curling over mine. Then closed the bank. "He'll hate you for it, at least for a while. But hate is better than dependence. Dependence will kill both of you." The room around us faded. The chatter, the clinking of pots, the smell of soil, all blurred as her words burned into me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't cruel. Other mothers had stood where I stood, and they had survived. For the first time in weeks, my shoulders loosened. I took a deep breath, inhaling the earthy scent of camellias. "I thought I was alone," I whispered. Eleanor shook her head. "You're not. Look around. Every woman here has a story of giving too much. The garden club isn't just about plants. It's about planting boundaries." The phrase made me smile. Planting boundaries. I had never thought of it that way, but it made sense. Like roses, boundaries had thorns for a reason. After the meeting ended, Eleanor walked with me to the parking lot. The late afternoon sun painted the sky pink and the air was filled with the hum of cicadas. She touched my arm. "Vivian, whatever they throw at you next, remember this. You don't owe them the keys. Not to the villa, not to your bank account, not to your peace." Her words echoed long after I drove home. That night, I stood in my rose garden, the one Harold and I had tended together. I brushed my hand over a bloom, the petals soft yet defended by sharp thorns. I realized that was me now. Still capable of beauty, still capable of love, but no longer defenseless. As the moon rose over the water, I whispered into the night, I am not alone. Inside, I sat again at the table of numbers, but this time the sight of the receipts didn't crush me. I thought of Eleanor's voice, steady and sure. 6 months. That was the seed she had planted in me. If she could survive cutting her daughter off, then maybe I could survive cutting Ethan loose. Maybe survival wasn't even the right word. Maybe I could grow. The villa no longer felt like a fortress of fear. For the first time, it felt like home again. 2 days after meeting Eleanor, I sat at my kitchen table with a phone in my hand, staring at a number written neatly on a slip of paper she had given me. Call him, she'd said. He knows how to protect people like us. I hesitated, the old part of me whispering that I shouldn't stir the pot, that maybe Ethan and Monica would calm down if I just stayed quiet. But then I remembered Monica's voice demanding the keys. Ethan's silence. And my own words, the machine is broken. I dialed. The line rang twice before a calm, measured voice answered, This is Donovan Weber. I introduced myself quickly, my words tumbling out. My name is Vivian Clark. I think my son and his wife are trying to take control of my villa. They've drained me for years and now they want the keys to my $5 million home. They're bringing lawyers into my house demanding documents. I don't know what to do. There was silence on the other end, but it wasn't the cold silence of judgment. It was the steady silence of someone listening carefully. Finally, he said, Mrs. Clark, what you're describing is elder financial abuse. It's more common than you'd think, and it's against the law. If you're ready, I can help you fight back. My throat tightened. Fight back? I don't know if I have the strength. You have more strength than you realize, he replied firmly. What you need is a strategy. You've been too generous, and now they believe generosity equals weakness. It doesn't. We'll prove that. That night, Mr. Weber came to the villa. He was in his late 40s with graying hair at his temples and eyes that carried both intelligence and compassion. He sat across from me at the table of numbers, scanning the receipts and bank statements I had laid out. 77,500, he murmured, tapping his pen against the total I had underlined. Rent, groceries, gifts, car repairs. This isn't support anymore. This is exploitation. Hearing someone else name it out loud sent a chill through me. So, what do we do? He leaned back, folding his hands. First, we document everything. Every check, every bill, every transfer. Then, we make sure you have no more automatic payments tied to them. You've already stopped that, which was smart. Next, we protect your villa. Change the locks, install security cameras. You'll want a written record that this property is solely yours and that any attempt to claim otherwise is invalid. I nodded. I've already changed the locks. The cameras are being installed tomorrow. He gave a small smile. Good. You're ahead of me. Finally, we prepare for escalation. From what you've told me, they've already brought a lawyer. That means they're planning something bigger. Possibly a guardianship petition, claiming you're not competent to manage your own affairs. The words hit me like a blow. Incompetent? They dare say that. They will, he said simply. It's the oldest trick in the book. But don't worry, we'll counter it. I'll have you evaluated by Dr. Moore, one of the most respected psychiatrists in the state. His report will make their accusations crumble. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. A man who knew the system was on my side, a shield between me and the storm. As he gathered the papers into a neat folder, he looked me in the eye. Vivian, you've been surviving on defense for too long. It's time you went on offense. If they want the keys, we'll make them face the condition you set, and we'll show the court you're stronger and sharper than they ever imagined. That night, after he left, I walked through the villa, each step echoing with new confidence. I paused at the door to the master bedroom where Harold's photograph still sat on the dresser. His smile in that picture was steady, reassuring. I'm not alone anymore, I whispered. I have someone fighting with me now. The next morning, the security team arrived to install cameras. I watched as they placed them above the doors, the gates, even the garage. When they finished, I stood in the driveway and looked at the villa. For years, it had felt like a burden, something Monica and Ethan would eventually strip from me. Now, with new locks and cameras, it looked like a fortress again. That evening, Eleanor stopped by with a basket of lemons from her yard. She spotted the new cameras and smiled knowingly. "I see Mr. Weber has been here." I nodded, clutching the basket to my chest. "He says they'll try to call me incompetent." Her eyes softened. "Then let them try. You'll prove them wrong, and when you do, you'll never doubt yourself again." As I stood there with her, the smell of lemons fresh and sharp in the air, I realized she was right. They would try, they would strike harder, but this time, I wasn't facing them as a machine to be drained. I was facing them as a woman with boundaries, allies, and fire. That night, I sat at the balcony with the ocean breeze on my face and whispered to the waves, "If they want a war, they've got one." The storm came faster than even Mr. Weber predicted. A thick envelope arrived at my doorstep one morning, delivered by a stern-looking courier who didn't bother with small talk. Inside was a letter from a law firm I'd never heard of, signed neatly at the bottom by Mr. Carroll. It accused me of being unable to manage my finances responsibly and claimed that for my own safety, my son and daughter-in-law were petitioning the court for guardianship over me. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands. Guardianship. It meant they wanted to strip me of my right to control my bank accounts, my property, my villa. It meant they wanted to reduce me to a child in the eyes of the law. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it echoing in my ears. That afternoon, Ethan and Monica showed up again, this time with smugness written all over their faces. Ethan wouldn't meet my eyes, but Monica looked directly at me, her voice syrupy sweet. "It's for your own good, Vivian. You've been slipping. Everyone can see it." "Slipping?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "The only thing slipping is your grip on my wallet." Her smile widened. "We'll let the court decide." Mr. Carroll's presence became clearer a few days later when he paraded their so-called witnesses. First was Mr. Davis, a neighbor who had always resented my rose garden because it blocked part of his view. He told anyone who would listen that he had observed concerning behavior. He mentioned the time I argued with Ethan on the driveway, twisting it into a sign of paranoia. He even hinted that strangers came and went from my villa, implying I was being manipulated. Then came Mr. Green, the pharmacist down the street. He had once filled Harold's prescriptions and later mine. Somehow, Monica convinced him to sign a statement suggesting I'd been confused about my medications. The truth was, I had once asked him to double-check a dosage after my doctor switched brands. A moment of caution twisted into evidence of incompetence. Finally, they unveiled their trump card, Dr. Lehman, a psychiatrist I had never met. According to Monica, he was concerned about signs of memory loss and poor judgment. Concerned without ever having spoken to me once in his life. He was a doctor for hire, his pen ready to scribble whatever diagnosis they needed. When Mr. Weber read through the documents, his jaw tightened. This is a full-scale assault. They're stacking witnesses, building a narrative. They want the judge to see you as fragile, confused, incapable. And what if the judge believes them? I whispered. He leaned forward, his voice firm. Then we make sure the judge sees the truth. They've built a story, Vivian. But stories crumble against facts. And we have facts. We have receipts, statements, your canceled transfers, even Dr. Moore's evaluation once we schedule it. Don't let their noise fool you. Still, fear not at me. It wasn't just Ethan and Monica anymore. It was neighbors, professionals, doctors. It felt like the world was tilting against me. As if that wasn't enough, a knock came on my door one Thursday morning. This time, it wasn't Ethan, Monica, or their lawyer. It was a woman in a gray suit with a badge clipped to her blazer. She introduced herself as Miss Schultz, a social worker assigned to investigate claims of elder neglect and incapacity. She stepped into my living room with a clipboard in hand, her eyes scanning everything, the bills on the table, the photos on the wall, the lavender dress still hanging by the closet. "Mrs. Clark, I'm here to ensure you're safe and able to manage on your own." For a moment, I felt my knees weaken. This was real now. It wasn't just Monica's words or Ethan's silence. The state was inside my home, judging whether I was fit to live freely. I offered her tea, my hands shaking only slightly as I poured. "You'll find I'm perfectly capable, Miss Schultz. The only danger in this house is how much money I've been giving away." Her brows furrowed. That's exactly what we need to clarify. By the time she left, promising to follow up, my chest felt tight with dread. They had escalated it beyond family squabbles. This was now a battle with paperwork, witnesses, and government oversight. That night, I sat on the balcony with the waves crashing below, clutching Harold's photo. They want to call me incompetent, I whispered into the dark, but I am more clear-eyed now than I have ever been. I knew the days ahead would be harder, but I also knew this. I wasn't backing down. 2 days after Miss Schultz's visit, my villa became the stage for a confrontation I'll never forget. I had barely finished brewing my morning coffee when I heard a knock at the door. Firm, official. When I opened it, there she stood again, clipboard in hand, her expression serious. But this time, she wasn't alone. Ethan and Monica hovered behind her, flanked by Mr. Carroll in his immaculate suit. Their smiles were tight rehearsed, like actors waiting for the curtain to rise. Mrs. Clark, Miss Schultz began, I need to follow up on my earlier visit. There are concerns. We need to address concerns. I almost laughed. The only concerns were the two vultures behind her, already imagining themselves sipping wine on my balcony overlooking the ocean. I stepped aside politely because I had nothing to hide. My home was tidy. My bills were neatly stacked. My pantry full. I was 71, yes, but not helpless, not broken. They walked into my living room like they owned it. Monica immediately eyed the family portraits, her gaze lingering on the frame of Harold and me on our wedding day. Such a beautiful villa, she said smoothly. But it's too much for Vivian to handle alone. She forgets things, misplaces important papers. We just want to help. My jaw tightened. I turned to Miss Schultz. If I may, I'd like to introduce someone. Right on cue, the front door opened again and Mr. Weber stepped inside, briefcase in hand. His voice was calm but commanding. Good morning. I'm Donovan Weber, legal counsel for Mrs. Clark. The shift in the room was immediate. Monica's smirk faltered. Ethan looked down at his shoes. Even Mr. Carroll's polished smile cracked for a split second. Weber shook Miss Schultz's hand firmly. I understand you're investigating claims of incapacity. I'd like to provide documentation that will clarify a few things. He opened his briefcase and laid out copies of bank records, neatly tabbed and highlighted. Over the past 3 years, Mrs. Clark has paid exactly $77,500 in rent, groceries, gifts, and car repairs for her son and daughter-in-law. These weren't signs of confusion or incompetence. They were signs of generosity. Generosity that was abused. Miss Schultz flipped through the papers, her brow furrowing. Weber continued, his voice steady. If she were incompetent, would she have detailed records of every expense? Would she have canceled automatic transfers at the bank, replaced locks on her villa, installed security cameras? This is not a woman who has lost capacity. This is a woman who has finally found the courage to say no. I sat straighter in my chair. His words wrapped around me like armor. But Monica wasn't finished. She gestured sharply toward Mr. Davis, who had just walked in uninvited. He cleared his throat nervously. I've seen concerning things. She argues with Ethan in the driveway. Strangers visit at odd hours. I think she's being manipulated. Weber didn't even blink. And do you have proof of these claims? Photographs, videos, anything beyond your personal dislike of her rose garden? Mr. Davis stammered, his face reddening. Well, no, but everyone talks, gossip. Weber cut him off, is not evidence. Next, Monica produced the statement from Mr. Green, the pharmacist. She handed it to Miss Schultz with a triumphant smile. See, even her pharmacist noticed confusion with medications. Weber took the paper, skimmed it, then handed it back. Mrs. Clark asked a pharmacist to double-check a dosage after a brand change. That's not confusion. That's caution. If anything, it proves she's responsible with her health. For the first time, Miss Schultz's lips curved ever so slightly as if she agreed. Mr. Carroll stepped forward, trying to regain control. We believe Mrs. Clark is vulnerable and in need of guardianship. My clients are simply trying to ensure her safety and the proper management of her estate. Weber's eyes sharpened. No, Mr. Carroll. What your clients want is control of a $5 million villa. They've drained her for years. And when the money stopped, they pivoted to legal manipulation. That's not protection. That's exploitation. The room went still. Monica's face burned crimson. Ethan's shoulders sagged, as though the weight of the truth was pressing down on him. Miss Schultz closed her folder. "I'll be filing my report," she said evenly. "And from what I've seen, Mrs. Clark is more than capable of managing her own affairs." Relief flooded through me so fast I nearly cried. They had brought their accusations, their witnesses, their smug certainty, but Mr. Weber had turned it all into smoke. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker in Monica's eyes. They left soon after, their footsteps echoing down the walkway. When the door closed, I slumped into my chair, trembling. Weber placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "They'll take this to court, Vivian. Be ready, but remember, you're not fighting alone anymore." I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper. "Let them bring the court. I'll be ready." That night, when the villa finally fell silent, I crumbled. The weight of it all pressed down until I could barely breathe. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the framed photo of Ethan as a child, his little hands covered in sand from the beach, his smile wide and innocent. Where had that boy gone? How had he grown into a man who would drag me into court, who would stand by while his wife accused me of being unfit to live my own life? Tears spilled down my cheeks, soaking the neckline of my nightgown. I had fought them at the bank, at the villa, even in front of the social worker. But alone in the dark, I felt small, old, forgotten. The villa, with its wide windows and polished marble floors, felt like a cavern now, echoing with emptiness. I pressed my face into my hands and sobbed until my body shook. All the strength I had shown in daylight seemed to slip through my fingers at night. The truth cut deep. My own son saw me as a burden, not a blessing. He saw me as a mother who once carried him on her hip. The phone rang sometime after midnight. I almost didn't answer, afraid it was another demand. But when I picked it up, it was Eleanor. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "I kept thinking about you." My voice cracked. "They're going to take me to court, Eleanor. My own son. How do you survive that kind of betrayal?" Her voice was soft but steady. "You cry. You scream. And then you stand back up because the one thing they want most is your surrender. Don't give it to them." I clutched the receiver to my chest after she hung up. Her words were a faint light in the darkness, but the ache inside me didn't fade. The next morning, members of the garden club came by with flowers and casseroles, little acts of kindness that made me cry all over again. They sat in my kitchen sipping coffee, their chatter filling the house with warmth. "You're not alone," one of them said firmly. "We'll stand with you if they take this to court." Their loyalty soothed me, but the hollow space inside remained. After they left, I drove to the cemetery, the one where Harold had been laid to rest. The headstones. When I reached his, I sank to my knees, the damp earth seeping into my skirt. "Oh, Harold," I whispered, my fingers tracing his name etched into the granite. "They want to say I'm incompetent. They want to declare me unfit so they can take our villa. The home you built with your hands. The home where we raised Ethan. Can you believe it? Our own son." The sobs came again, raw and ragged. "I don't know if I can do this without you. You were always the strong one. I was the one who kept peace, who gave and gave. And now they're using that against me." The cemetery was quiet except for the sound of the breeze moving through the trees. A bird landed on a nearby branch, chirping as if to break the silence. I closed my eyes and let the sound steady me. I wanted to believe love was enough, I whispered, but love turned me into a bottomless vending machine. And now when I finally stop, they call me cruel. Maybe I was wrong to hope Ethan would ever see me as more than money. For a long time, I stayed there, kneeling in front of Harold's grave, the weight of loneliness pressing into my bones. But somewhere inside the grief, a spark began to flicker. Because even through the despair, I knew this wasn't the end. I pressed my palm flat against the stone. They want me to believe I'm powerless. But Harold, I hear you. You'd never let me give in. You tell me to stand. To fight. By the time I left the cemetery, my cheeks were still damp, but my spine was straighter. The fight wasn't finished yet. The cemetery was nearly empty when I returned the next evening. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and violet, the kind of twilight Harold had always loved. I carried a single white rose in my hand, its petals trembling in the breeze. When I reached his grave, I knelt down slowly, the damp grass pressing against my knees. For a long moment, I just stared at his name etched into the stone, Harold Clark, beloved husband and father. The words carved into granite felt heavier now. Beloved father. Would Ethan even remember what that meant? I placed the rose at the base of the stone and let the silence fill me. My chest ached with grief, but grief was no longer the only thing inside me. Anger had begun to burn there, too, steady and sharp. Harold, I whispered, I've tried everything. I gave Ethan everything. I thought if I just kept giving, he'd love me. That he'd remember I was his mother. But all he remembers is the sound of money leaving my hands. They call me incompetent. They want the keys to our $5 million villa. They think they can erase me with a signature. My voice broke, but I didn't stop. Do you know what hurts the most? Not Monica's cruelty. Not Carol's lies. It's Ethan's silence. He doesn't fight for me. He doesn't defend me. He stands there and lets them carve me up like a corpse they're eager to bury. I pressed my palm against the cold granite, the chill seeping into my skin. But I won't let them. Not anymore. The machine is broken. Do you hear me, Harold? The machine is broken and I am free. The words spilled out louder than I intended, carried off by the wind. My tears dried on my cheeks, leaving only salt and resolve. For the first time, I wasn't just mourning what I had lost. I was promising what I would fight for. I swear to you, I said firmly, my voice steady now. I will not let them take our home. I will not let them reduce me to a number on a form. I will stand in that courtroom, and I will remind everyone who I am. I am Vivian Clark. I am not a bank account. I am not a burden. I am a woman who built her life with her own hands. And I am not finished yet. The breeze picked up, lifting my hair from my shoulders. I closed my eyes and imagined Harold standing behind me, his steady hand on my shoulder, his voice calm and reassuring. In that moment, I didn't feel entirely alone. When I rose to my feet, the twilight had deepened into dusk. I wiped the dirt from my knees and looked down at the rose resting against the headstone. This isn't goodbye, Harold. It's a promise. And when I win, I'll come back here and tell you myself. On the drive home, the road seemed clearer. The villa less like a prison and more like a fortress. I pulled into the driveway just as the first stars began to appear in the sky. Inside, I found Mr. Weber waiting with a folder tucked under his arm. His expression softened when he saw me. You've been to the cemetery, he said quietly. I nodded. I made a vow. I'll fight them until the end. He placed the folder on the table. Then you'll need this. Dr. Moore has agreed to evaluate you. He's thorough, respected, and not afraid to contradict people like Dr. Lehman. His report could decide everything. I ran my hand over the folder, feeling its weight. Then let's do it. I want them to see I'm stronger than they ever believed. Weber smiled faintly. That's the spirit I was hoping to see. That night, as I double-checked the locks on the villa and glanced at the red lights of the new security cameras, I felt a new kind of calm. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it had hardened into something sharper, determination. I climbed into bed, Harold's photo still on the nightstand. Before I turned off the lamp, I whispered into the quiet room, tomorrow, the fight begins in earnest, and I am ready. 2 mornings later, I sat in Dr. Moore's office, a modest room filled with shelves of medical books and framed certificates. The walls were painted a calming blue, but nothing about my mood was calm. My palms were damp as I clutched my handbag, waiting for him to finish jotting notes on his clipboard. Mrs. Clark, he said finally, his tone steady. We'll go through a series of tests today. Nothing invasive, nothing to fear. I just need to see how well you think, reason, and recall information. This evaluation will speak louder than any accusation. I nodded, forcing a small smile. Let's begin. For nearly 2 hours, he asked me to remember sequences of words, solve simple problems, recount details from a story. He asked about my daily routines, my finances, even about Harold. I answered each question with clarity. My mind felt sharp, sharper than it had in years, because I knew what was at stake. When he finished, he sat down his pen and looked me directly in the eye. Mrs. Clark, your results are not just good, they're excellent. You scored above average for your age group in memory, comprehension, and reasoning. There is no sign whatsoever of diminished capacity. Relief hit me so hard my chest loosened. For weeks, I had carried the fear that maybe they were right, that maybe I was slipping. But here, it was written in ink by a professional. I was sound. I was strong. Dr. Moore added, I'll prepare a full report. Mr. Weber will have it in his hands by tomorrow. That night, when I returned to the villa, Weber was already waiting. He took the report from me like it was a weapon he had been aching to wield. This, he said firmly, is our shield, and tomorrow we begin gathering the swords. The swords came in the form of witnesses. The Garden Club members signed affidavits, each one describing me as clear-headed, organized, and active in the community. Eleanor stood beside me, unwavering, her words crisp. Vivian has more energy and clarity than women 10 years younger. If anyone doubts her, let them spend one afternoon at the Garden Club. Then came the turn I never expected. Mr. Green, the pharmacist who had once signed Monica's version of events, showed up at my door with a flushed face and a folded letter in his hand. I need to set the record straight, he said, his voice shaky. I never meant for my words to be twisted. You weren't confused, Mrs. Clark. You were cautious, and you were right to double-check that prescription. Monica pressured me into signing a statement, but I can't live with that lie. This letter retracts my earlier words. I took the letter with trembling hands. Thank you, Mr. Green. You don't know how much this means. He shook his head. I do. People like her ruin reputations. I won't let mine be one of them. When Weber read the retraction, he nodded with satisfaction. Another pillar gone from their case. Davis's gossip. Lehman is a hired pen. And now Green has turned. Back to the truth. Their tower is crumbling. But Weber had one more surprise. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a crisp document, its header reading, No Claim Agreement. My breath caught in my throat. This, he explained, is the exact agreement you mentioned when you confronted them. The one stating they could only enter your villa if they paid 6 months of rent on their own and signed away any claim to your trust. You wrote it weeks ago, didn't you? I nodded slowly. I drafted it after their first demand. I never thought I'd need it, but yes, it's real. He slid it across the table. Then this is gold. It proves you weren't confused. You weren't senile. You were setting terms, boundaries. This paper shows foresight, planning, and strength. It ties back to the very words you said to Monica. Didn't I mention the condition? The phrase echoed in my mind, as sharp as the day I said it. The condition. That was the hook, the proof, the line they couldn't erase. For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt the ground beneath me solidify. I wasn't stumbling anymore. I had my allies. I had my evidence. I had my voice. That evening, I stood in the rose garden, the air heavy with the scent of blooms. The security cameras blinked faintly from the eaves of the villa, silent sentinels watching over me. I closed my eyes and whispered, I'm ready, Harold. I'm ready to face them all. Because now it wasn't just me against Monica's smirk and Ethan's silence. It was me with a lawyer, a doctor, a community, and a paper trail sharp enough to cut through every lie they had built. And soon, we would take it all to court. The day of the hearing arrived with skies as gray as my mood. I wore a navy dress suit Harold had once loved, simple, but dignified, and clutched my cane a little tighter as I walked up the courthouse steps. My knees ached, but my spine was straight. This wasn't just another day. This was the day they tried to strip me of my life. The courtroom was packed tighter than I expected. Neighbors, acquaintances, even members of the Garden Club had shown up. Whispers filled the air until the bailiff called for order. I took my seat at the defense table beside Mr. Weber, my heart pounding in my ears. Across from me, Ethan and Monica sat with their lawyer, Mr. Carroll. Monica's lips curled into that familiar smirk, and Ethan couldn't even meet my eyes. The judge entered. Judge Alvarez, his presence commanding, as he adjusted his robe and looked across the room. This court is now in session. Petitioners proceed. Carol stood first, his voice smooth, almost theatrical. Your Honor, today we present the case of a woman, Mrs. Vivian Clark, who sadly can no longer manage her financial or personal affairs. Our clients, her devoted son and daughter-in-law, only wish to ensure her safety and the proper handling of her estate. I clenched my fists under the table. Devoted son, devoted daughter-in-law. The words tasted like poison. Carol gestured toward me. She is 71, widowed, and isolated. She has displayed concerning behaviors, mismanaging funds, showing confusion over simple matters. This is not a question of greed, but of love and necessity. Guardianship will protect her from herself. Then he called his first witness. Mr. Davis shuffled to the stand, clearing his throat. I've lived next to Mrs. Clark for years. I've seen her arguing in her driveway, raising her voice, seeming paranoid. I've noticed strangers visiting late at night. I believe she's being manipulated. She's not the same woman she used to be. I sat rigid, heat rising in my chest. Strangers? Those strangers were the security team I had hired. The garden club dropping off flowers. Eleanor bringing lemons. Next came Mr. Green's earlier statement, read aloud as though it were gospel. Mrs. Clark demonstrated confusion regarding her prescriptions. Carol intoned, she could not manage them responsibly. My stomach turned. Though I knew the man had retracted it, Carol still used the old words to stain me. Finally, Carol introduced Dr. Lehman, a tall, polished man with spectacles glinting under the fluorescent lights. He spoke with practiced authority. Based on observations provided to me and reports I reviewed, Mrs. Clark demonstrates early signs of diminished capacity. Her judgment is impaired. Her memory questionable. Guardianship would provide stability. Monica dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, the picture of a concerned daughter-in-law. Ethan leaned forward, his face pale, his voice low as he testified, my mother forgets things. She loses track of money. She doesn't know what's best for herself anymore. We just want to help her. His words pierced deeper than any lawyer's argument. To hear my son, the boy I once rocked to sleep, say I wasn't capable of being myself, it was like being buried alive. I felt every eye in the courtroom shift toward me, waiting to see if I would break. My chest tightened. For a heartbeat, I wanted to run, to let them take it all so I could finally stop fighting. But then I caught sight of Eleanor in the gallery. She sat upright, her chin high, her eyes burning with faith in me. Behind her, the garden club women nodded in quiet solidarity, and at my side, Mr. Weber leaned close and whispered, "Hold steady. Their stage is almost over. Then we take the floor." Judge Alvarez raised a hand. The court has heard the petitioner's opening and witnesses. We will now proceed to cross-examination. Carol returned to his seat, Monica clutching his arm like she'd already won. Ethan's eyes flicked to me briefly, but he looked away just as quickly, shame shadowing his face. My breath steadied as Weber rose slowly, his expression unreadable, but his presence commanding. Your Honor, he began. What we have just heard is a story. A story stitched together from gossip, exaggerations, and the convenient words of hired voices. But stories can be tested, and that is what we will do. I straightened in my chair. My heart was still pounding, but it wasn't just fear anymore. It was fire. Their side had painted me as weak, confused, broken. Now it was our turn to show the truth. Mr. Weber rose slowly, buttoning his jacket with deliberate precision. He moved toward the center of the courtroom, his voice calm but edged with steel. Your Honor, what the petitioners have presented is not evidence of incapacity. It is evidence of exploitation. The judge inclined his head, granting him the floor. Weber turned first to Mr. Davis, still sitting uneasily in the witness chair. Mr. Davis, you testified that you observed arguments in Mrs. Clark's driveway. Tell me, were these arguments about her confusion or about money? Davis shifted uncomfortably. Well, money mostly. So, not confusion? Disagreements about her saying no after years of paying their bills. Yes, I suppose. Weber leaned closer. And these so-called strangers you saw visiting, would you like to know who they were? Members of her garden club bringing casseroles. A licensed security company installing cameras. Friends, not manipulators. You mistook kindness for chaos, didn't you? Davis flushed crimson. Maybe I did. Thank you. No further questions. Weber turned away, leaving Davis wilted in his chair. Next came Mr. Green. Carol tried to keep him seated, but Weber called him forward. Mr. Green, you once signed a statement saying Mrs. Clark was confused about her medication. Would you tell the court why you retracted it? Green cleared his throat, his voice shaky but firm. Because it wasn't true. Mrs. Clark wasn't confused. She double-checked a dosage after her doctor switched brands. That's responsibility, not incompetence. Monica pressured me to sign. I regret it, and I want the record corrected. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Monica's face darkened, her jaw tight. Weber turned toward the judge, so the pharmacist himself admits the claim was false. That leaves us with Dr. Lehman. The psychiatrist adjusted his glasses, unruffled. Weber stepped closer, voice precise. Dr. Lehman, have you ever personally examined Mrs. Clark? No, but based on reports written by others here. So, you've never spoken to her, never administered a test, never looked her in the eye. Is that correct? Yes, but thank you. No further questions. Lehman's composure cracked as whispers spread through the gallery. The foundation of their case was eroding piece by piece. Weber reached into his briefcase and produced a thick folder. Your Honor, allow me to submit Dr. Moore's full evaluation. Unlike Dr. Lehman, Dr. Moore actually examined Mrs. Clark. He found her above average in memory, reasoning, and judgment. These results prove she is fully competent to manage her life and estate. Judge Alvarez flipped through the report, his brow lifting slightly as he scanned the highlighted scores. But Weber wasn't finished. He walked to the evidence table and lifted another document, the one that made my breath catch, the no-claim agreement. Your Honor, weeks before this petition was filed, Mrs. Clark drafted this agreement. It stated that if her son and daughter-in-law wished to enter her villa, they must pay 6 months of rent from their own pockets and sign away any claim to her property or trust. This is not the act of a woman confused or incapable. This is foresight. This is a woman setting clear boundaries. She even used the very phrase she repeated on the phone. Didn't I mention the condition? All eyes swung to Monica. Her face drained of color, then flushed again with rage. Ethan's shoulders sagged, his lips pressed together in silence. Weber turned to me. Mrs. Clark, would you like to address the court yourself? My legs trembled as I rose, cane in hand, but my voice was steady. I faced the judge, the gallery, and finally, my son. For years, I believed love meant giving. I gave 36 months of rent, $64,800. I bought groceries, gifts, even car repairs. In total, $77,500. I thought if I just kept giving, my son would see me. But I was wrong. I wasn't his mother. I was his bottomless vending machine. The phrase echoed through the room. Even Monica flinched. I continued, my voice louder now. When they cut me out of their wedding and called it family only, I stayed silent. But when they demanded the keys to my $5 million villa, I finally said no. Not without meeting the condition. Not without respect. And because I said no, they dragged me here to be declared incompetent. But look at me. I am not broken. I am not weak. I am free. For a moment, the courtroom was utterly silent. Then Judge Alvarez leaned forward, his tone measured but clear. The evidence presented by the petitioners is insufficient, unreliable, and in some cases, outright retracted. The defense has provided credible documentation, professional evaluations, and testimony that proves Mrs. Clark is fully capable of managing her life and estate. Therefore, the petition for guardianship is denied. My knees nearly buckled with relief. The gavel struck, the sound echoing like thunder. I had won. Across the aisle, Monica's face twisted into fury. Her carefully painted mask shattered. Ethan lowered his head, shame etched into every line of his posture. But I didn't look at them long. I turned instead to the gallery, to Eleanor and the garden club, to Mr. Weber and Dr. Moore, to every face that had stood with me. I raised my chin. "The machine is broken," I said quietly, but firmly, "and I am free." The gallery erupted into quiet applause, muffled but heartfelt. Eleanor's eyes glistened with pride. Weber placed a steady hand on my arm. "You did it, Vivian. You stood your ground." I nodded, my chest swelling with something I hadn't felt in years: dignity. I had walked into that courtroom accused of being powerless. I walked out as proof that no one, no child, no spouse, no lawyer had the right to erase me. The day after the hearing, I woke up to the sound of waves brushing against the shore. For the first time in months, the sound didn't feel like background noise to my worry. It felt like freedom. Sunlight streamed through the villa windows, warm and golden, painting the walls in hope instead of dread. I walked slowly through each room, touching the polished banister, the framed photos, the curtains Harold had chosen years ago. This villa had been a battlefield, but it didn't have to remain one. It was time to let it become something else. My sanctuary had been turned into a target. Now I would choose what it became next. By the end of that week, I signed papers with a real estate agent. The villa sold for $5 million, just as I had always known it was worth. People gasped when they heard I was letting it go. But I felt lighter the moment I handed over the keys. They had wanted those keys so desperately, and now they meant nothing to me. I moved into a smaller condominium overlooking the sea, a place built for peace rather than grandeur. The view was just as breathtaking, but the space felt mine in a way the villa hadn't for years. Here, no footsteps echoed that weren't my own. No shadow of entitlement darkened the doorway. Only me and the freedom I had fought for. The first thing I did with the money was set aside a donation. $1 million went directly to an organization dedicated to fighting elder financial abuse. I wanted other women, mothers, widows, anyone who had been treated as a wallet instead of a person, to know they weren't alone. I wanted them to know their voices mattered and that their dignity wasn't for sale. The rest I divided carefully, enough to live comfortably, enough to travel, enough to breathe without fear of the next phone call asking for more. For once, my accounts were for me, not for anyone else's debts. Diana, my sister, came to visit the new condo soon after. She walked through the door carrying flowers and her familiar no-nonsense smile. "It suits you," she said, glancing at the wide balcony where the ocean shimmered. I hugged her tightly. "It feels like starting over." She pulled back, looking into my eyes. "You didn't just start over, Vivian. You won. You proved you were more than their machine. You proved you were free." Her words filled me with a warmth I had longed for. Family didn't always come from blood. It came from truth, from people who loved you enough to stand beside you instead of drain you. Diana had always been that person. And now Eleanor and the garden club were too. Not long after, Eleanor invited me on a trip. "Italy," she said with a mischievous smile. "We'll drink wine, walk through gardens, and remind ourselves that life isn't over just because people tried to bury us early." And so we went. In Florence, I stood before cathedrals that had survived centuries, stronger for their cracks. In Rome, I threw a coin into the Trevi fountain, whispering a wish not for riches, but for resilience. In Venice, I sat by the canals and laughed with Eleanor until my cheeks hurt. For the first time in decades, I wasn't living for anyone else's needs. I was living for mine. One evening, back at the condo, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine. The sun was sinking into the horizon, casting gold across the water. I held Harold's photograph in my lap and smiled through the sting of tears. "We did it," I whispered. "They wanted to erase me, but I stood. I'm not their vending machine anymore. I'm free." The wind carried my words out over the ocean, and I imagined Harold smiling back at me, proud. I leaned forward, speaking not just to him, but to all of you who've listened to my story. If you were me, facing down your own child after all that, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments below. I really want to know your thoughts.